how come
my company never asked me?
My idea of financial security.
Country Financial does. Your country representative can help protect what you have now and prepare for the future.
Yeah.
What's your idea of financial security?
Hello, I'm Jak Tichenor, and welcome to Illinois Lawmakers' weekly coverage of the spring session of the Illinois General Assembly as we count down to adjournment on May 31st. Joining me now in the House Speaker's Gallery is Amanda Vinicky, City House Bureau Chief for Illinois Public Radio. Lots going on this week here at the Capitol.
Lots going on and lots not happening
well,
on both fronts.
And that's May around here. Of course, one of the big events in the week was the move to put a graduated income tax before Illinois voters kind of sputtered out.
Yes, there was a last-minute scramble, and the sponsor in the Senate, Ton Harmon, had predicted earlier in the day that it was going to go before a Senate vote. There is a Democratic supermajority in the Senate, and he said they had more than enough to pass it. The question was, what about the House, where you had already at least one Democrat, and you would need, they have the spare 71, the bare minimum that would be needed to pass it, Democrats, but at least one Democrat saying that he wouldn't go for it. Republicans had come out against it, and so Harmon had seemed to think that he was going to be negotiating and had the extra votes. Didn't turn out to be the case, and so instead he pulled it, didn't even call it for a controversial vote in the Senate, because what's the point of putting people on record? Exactly. He says he's not done with it yet, though, Jak. I mean, he says that he still believes that that is the better way for Illinois to go, that Illinois would have more flexibility in crafting a tax and revenue policy if Illinois were to be able to tax based on income instead of just the flat, what he calls regressive tax. So next election, maybe.
And of course, right now, what we're looking at is to see how the votes come down on gathering enough Democratic votes, because Republicans won't be on this, and extending the 5% income tax past January 1 of next year. The Democrats have put out a lot of really scary numbers if this thing doesn't go.
They're doing all they can to try and make the argument that it is far better to keep the current tax rate than it would be to pull back on state programs, be it leaving behind the state capitol police force. And I don't know if viewers may recall that, you know, some years back, somebody was shot, and so that's when really they did have armed guards. Those would be gone. You know, prison closures or letting prisoners out, drug rehab facilities, they're doing all they can. Republicans are trying to call their bluff and say, hey, you're going a little too far crying wolf here.
We think we can actually, and they're going to tell you, we think we can actually find the savings in the current budget. And we'll talk more about that a little later. Also, Bruce Rauner came to town, the Republican candidate for governor, had almost a ton of signatures, literally a ton of signatures for his term limit proposal.
I believe it was nearly 68,000 pages of signatures. He got well over 500,000 to turn in, submit to the State Board of Elections, this effort that would put on the ballot in November so that citizens would have the ability to decide if they want to institute term limits. It's known as the Term Limits Initiative. It does do some other things, though. Scales back the size of the Senate. Downstaters don't like that, makes the House bigger, and would give would-be Governor Rauner more authority in terms of veto power.
And, of course, at this point, a close ally of Speaker Madigan's has filed an appeal to that, or a legal challenge to that, as well as a redistricting proposal.
Exactly. So the Democratic Party of Illinois says, oh, no, this isn't us. This is just Mike Casper, who happens to be, as well, the attorney for the Democratic Party of Illinois. But we do know that Casper, as well as other allies of Speaker Madigan, had a meeting earlier with some minority groups. They are all of the plaintiffs in that. So we'll see what the courts do. It could be that citizens never even get the chance to vote on these.
We'll stay tuned. Amanda Vinicky, thanks very much. Next up on the program, a discussion, 2 points of view on what happens to that income tax increase in January. On this edition of Illinois Lawmakers, we're going to start out with a discussion on the budget. Joining us now in the House Speaker's Gallery is the House Majority Leader, Democratic State Representative Barbara Flynn Currie of Chicago. good to have you with us.
Thank you very much for including me.
And happy birthday wishes.
Thank you very much. Not till Saturday, but I'll take them whenever I get them.
All right, they're all good at this point. That's what I say about them. The governor, of course, a little earlier in the spring submitted basically what amounts to two different budget proposals.
Right.
One anticipates that the House and Senate will extend the income tax increase past January. The other does not, and it has a lot of deep cuts in it.
It does
your
indeed.
Your view on the overall situation from the Democratic
I think
side.
the governor got it exactly right. We have options. We can either do a responsible budget that does an adequate job, not a super job, but an adequate job of funding public education, healthcare, human services, or we can leave a lot of people in the lurch. And it is my view that we definitely need an adequate revenue supply in order to meet the basic needs of the state's responsibility to school kids, to the poor, to people who need our help, disabled children and adults, children who are victims of abuse and neglect. If we don't find the revenues, we really are going to leave people without very much in the way of choices.
You're a member of the House Revenue and Finance Committee, where a lot of the heavy lifting actually happens in creating and crafting the budget here at Springfield. You're looking at least a $1.6 billion shortfall if that income tax increase sunsets in January.
That's exactly right. And if you double it, which is what you'd have to do, since that's only half the fiscal year, you can see that it's real money in the coming budget years.
The Senate Republican leaders and the House Republican leaders have basically said, you're crying wolf on this. The situation is not nearly as dire as that. They're saying that basically you can dig into this current budget and come up with a level budget. You can find the savings there.
I think they're wrong, and I'd like to see exactly how they intend to do it. My impression is that most of my Republican colleagues are no more anxious to leave their school kids in the lurch, to say no to community mental health, to say no to health care and other programs that serve the poor than any of my Democratic colleagues. So it's easy to say waste, fraud, abuse, we can cut, we can cut, we can cut, but it's much harder actually to do it without leaving people in the lurch.
Kind of a constant refrain that they've had over the last few months is, well, the temporary income tax over its lifespan so far has raised something like $26 billion. We're still running a deficit. Where did the money go?
Well, the money went to all the places we said it was going to go. We have significantly reduced the backlog of old bills, but the reality is we did have a backlog of old bills. We had debts we hadn't paid, and we're still paying them off. So I would say we talk about the temporary income tax increase, but there was nothing that said in the beginning this will be temporary. It's like all of the tax incentives we provide for businesses and others, those sunset. So they're around for 5 years or 2 years or whatever the number is. And when the sunset comes up, we look at those incentives to decide whether they work, whether they should be renewed. The same thing is true of the income tax increase. We said, here's a date certain, but that didn't mean a date certain for it to go away. It meant a date certain when we are going to reevaluate the state's resources, the state's needs, and the importance of either retaining or letting that revenue fall by the wayside.
The Democrats have supermajorities in both the House and Senate. They could pass this really with Democratic votes at this point.
Just the income tax increase?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that would take 60 votes in the House, 30 votes in the Senate. But remember that Democrats don't all agree on anything. As Will Rogers once said, I belong to no organized political party. I'm a Democrat. And there's no question that there are varieties of opinions on taxes and all other issues within the Democratic caucus. My guess, however, is at the end of the day, this extension will pass, if it does, with Democratic votes only. That was what happened when the increase in the income tax was instituted a few years ago. There were no Republican votes. Republicans have come to the view that their best political advice is to just say no. I don't think that their electoral successes have suggested that that's a very good political strategy. On Election Day, I don't think the voters buy the idea that you can just opt out of governance, but I think that is their strategic preference.
When Speaker Madigan was on the program after the budget message, he anticipated that it could be done by the end of the scheduled session, adjournment on May 31st. In the last few days, he said, well, it's still a few votes short of that.
Right, and I think that's a fair estimate. He's a very good counter, is Speaker Madigan, and I'm hopeful that we can shore up those people who are still reluctant and find 60 votes in this chamber, and to do it well before May 31st.
House Majority Leader Barbara Flynn Currie of Chicago, thanks very much for being on the program. We
Thank
certainly
you.
appreciate it.
Thank
Up
you.
next on the program, we'll get a Republican perspective on the budget. Up next on the program, a Republican view of the budget-making process here in Springfield. Our guest is Senator Matt Murphy of Palatine, Deputy Senate Republican Leader and the Senate Republicans' point person on the budget. Good to have you back.
Good to be with you, Jack. Thanks.
The governor has basically outlined two budget scenarios. One that takes into account maintaining the temporary income tax increase at the 5% level, and one that's about a 20% cut from that if that $1.6 billion in revenues are not here if that budget, if that tax increase sunset.
I think what we've seen this spring, Jack, is an admission by the governor and the Democrats who have run Illinois for 12 years now that their tax increase failed to solve the problems that they said it would solve on a temporary basis. And now they're going to make that final broken promise and make what was said to be a temporary tax permanent. And to try to sell this tax, they are creating this cartoonish doomsday scenario of what will happen if the people of this state go back to getting to keep their own money instead of state government keeping it. And we've gone through the numbers, and we believe you can have the tax roll back. It doesn't go all the way back by law, but we can have the tax roll back and still fund core services at a flat level. It's going to take some commitment, but we believe that can be done. But more importantly, what you're seeing right now from Democrats in Springfield is what I consider to be, I call it the parade of horribles. They bring people in and they say you're going to have to cut spending by 20% in core services, and it's just not true.
If you're looking at making up something like $1.6 billion in a budget that already has several billion dollars in overdue bills hanging out back there, where are you going to find that kind of money?
Well, Illinois is actually going to run a little bit of a surplus this year. What I would propose is that you pay down next year's installment on paying down the deficit this year with some of that surplus. What that also means is that the spending level this year is going to be such that it'll match a little bit more closely with what we'll get revenue-wise, even with the tax rolling off. So there is an opportunity here for us to have a budget that fits the revenue that will come in. And most importantly, Jack, you have to keep in mind, and I think it's important for people to remember, when that tax increase passed in January 2011, Illinois was at a point where our unemployment rate was actually better than the national average for much of the year before. We have shot all the way up to the third highest unemployment rate in the country because of that tax since. So we need to keep in mind job creation and opportunity when we think about the extension of this tax as well.
Still hanging over everything is the fact that you have 5 lawsuits before the Illinois Supreme Court on the pension agreement that passed out of here back in December. That's another $1 billion plus that is going to come out of the budget if the justices toss that thing out.
Well, we're not taking into account any savings from the pension bill until the Supreme Court says that it's constitutional. So this doesn't make, we're counting on the full payment now. We haven't started taking, and we aren't for our numbers, and I don't think the Democrats have yet either for their numbers, started taking the pension savings into account. But if that bill is held to be constitutional in 2016, when we have a full year of the tax rolling off, there is the potential for even more savings there.
In terms of the numbers, though, there are 19 Senate Republicans out of 59. There are 47 House Republicans out of the 118 over here. The Democrats can muscle this thing through
Sure.
if they want to without you.
Yeah, and the Democrats have indicated that they are prepared to break the promise that they made that the tax increase would be temporary. And, you know, I guess the question is, if you couldn't solve the problem with the tax increase in the first 4 years, why would people have confidence that you're going to solve it on an ongoing, permanent basis? And where do the Democrats ever admit that they did substantially damage the jobs climate in Illinois with this tax increase?
In the last minute or so we have, where are the specific Republican proposals, though, to ferret out that money in the current budget?
We've made it crystal clear that we're prepared to work with the Democrats to pass a budget that lives within the promise of the tax increase being temporary. We believe you can do it without all the cartoonish doomsday cut scenarios that the Democrats are putting out there to sell their tax increase now. We stand ready to work with them.
Senator Matt Murphy of Palatine, thanks very much. Always good to have you on the program.
Good to be with you, Jack.
All
Thanks.
right. And glad to see you're up and about after last year's softball game.
That's right, back in action.
Up next on the program, Illinois lawmakers are taking a new look at how the state funds its education system for K through 12 schools. Up next on Illinois Lawmakers, we're going to talk about changing the way we fund our schools in the state of Illinois. Our guest, our freshman Democratic Senator Andy Manar of Bunker Hill. He's co-chaired a bipartisan legislative committee to examine the disparity in school funding across the state. He's joined by fellow freshman Republican Senator Jason Barickman of Bloomington, who is also a member of the Advisory Committee on Educational Funding. Good to have you both on the program, and happy birthday, Senator Barickman.
Thank you.
All right. This has been an issue here at the Capitol for as long as I've been coming here, and I've heard people writing about it all the way back to the mid-50s. What is wrong with the way the state of Illinois funds education at the K through 12 level?
Well, we need a course correction, Jack, and it has been around a while. I was actually, one of my first visits in the Capitol building was here in the House chamber when Jim Edgar was governor, and I was tagging along with Vince DiMuzio when he called both chambers of the legislature together to deal with the same issue that we're trying and struggling to deal with today. But our formula today doesn't base itself on the challenges that we face. It bases itself on what we faced in 1997 when the last law was set into motion. So we need a course correction. How we do that, though, is still to be determined, but I think we have a pretty good product in front of the Senate, and hopefully we can bring that to a vote.
Are you realizing some of the same problems in your district in central Illinois?
Absolutely. You know, this is a statewide issue. If you talk to a local school board member, an administrator, a principal, I think you'll get the same answer anywhere in the state, which is the limited resource, which is state funding, is not being distributed fairly among the hundreds of school districts around the state.
And when you talk about that, the state constitution says the state of Illinois will basically come up with the majority of the funding, and yet that number is hovers around the 30% level. We're a state that has a first world economy, but we're basically at the bottom when it comes to the amount of state dollars that go to schools.
Yeah, and to change that, that's going to take a long-term approach. What we've tried to focus on through the EFAC hearings and now with Senate Bill 16 is how we distribute however much money we have is very important. So at the root of the recommendations from EFAC was not the idea that we should spend more, but we should begin the conversation first on how we spend what we have, and as Senator Barickman mentioned, how we do that is a little counterproductive today.
So what's the change? How are you going to make sure that those dollars go to the school districts that need it the most?
Well, you gotta look at what's there today, and what's there today is a very kind of antiquated, complex formula which results in this disparity. We measured that formula last year, and we came out with numbers that show the disparities. The complexion here is, as Senator Manar said, is how do you change that? And I think, our committee has worked hard at that effort. I think the devil's in the details at this point in the process, and we're waiting to see what the data suggests as to the legislation that Senator Manar's proposed. If the data fixes the problem, you'd say, we've maybe got a good start here. If it doesn't, we've got more work to do.
What you're looking at basically is the ability of the local school districts through their property taxes to pay for education. Right?
Yeah, correct. And we have to account for the vast disparity in the state that exists, which has always existed in Illinois. I would argue it hasn't existed to the extent that it does today. So at the basis of the bill is to account for that in a better way through a funding distribution formula that would aid districts that can't raise resources on their own. And we're hoping that after the State Board of Education releases data, which I would expect very soon, that it will show that that's what not just the intention of Senate Bill 16 is, but the actual effect of the bill itself.
When you dig into the numbers a little more deeply, the numbers are really very distressing. You might have, let's say, New Trier, a wonderful high school district in the wealthier suburbs of the Chicagoland area. They might be able to spend $20,000 a year per pupil because of the fantastic property base they've got. But you come downstate or in different parts of the state, you'll be lucky to come up with the $6,100 that the Education Funding Advisory Board says is the bare minimum the state should spend.
And you see some of that, you know, as you scratch the surface of our funding formula, but it's when you dig deeper that it really gets complicated. We talk about poor children, and you know, we're a big state, we're a diverse state, and we have a lot of poverty in all areas of the state. As you look at how we provide funds to a school district that has poverty children, those on a free or reduced lunch, I think what you see is some of the disparity shows, so that a child who goes to school in Cicero might receive different funding than a child who goes to school in Bloomington, Bunker Hill, or elsewhere.
And how does your bill seek to change that? How do you dig into these various formulas? And you kind of touched upon what we call the poverty grant to bring that threshold up to $6,100 or so. How do you weight all these different factors?
Yeah, that was much of the focus of the EFAC committee hearings across the state was how do we better account for the challenges that districts face with poverty. There's many more districts that are faced with this challenge today than there were in 1997. Many of them are downstate in both of our districts, for example, and that wasn't the case 17 years ago. So what we've attempted to do, and again, I hope that the numbers from the state board will confirm this, is to try to smooth out that what we call, graph of how poverty dollars are distributed among districts based on not just their number of children living in poverty, but the concentration of poverty, both of which have an impact on a child's education, which is what we heard from experts at the EFAC level.
One of the things I read, and I believe I've got this right, correct me if I'm wrong, but something like 70% of the school districts in the state are deficit spending right now?
That's about right, yeah.
That's appalling.
Yeah. And I think that there's two things at work there, Jack. One is, the fact that we've cut education spending at the state level. And second of all, and I think equally as important, is that our funding distribution formula doesn't account for where the needs are the greatest on the local level. So a lot of those cuts, a lot of the districts that are now deficit spending are the ones that can least afford it.
How does it work out?
Well, and so to show you again some of the complexity here, the dollars that have been available to education historically, say over the last 5 or 10 years, is, there's a number that you can quantify and say, these are the dollars that are available for education. But as you break that down to the primary mechanism in which school districts receive funding through the general state aid formula, what you'll see is on a local level, that number, year after year, even in the years when more funding is thrown into the mix, there's a lot of schools who are seeing decreases in the amount they actually receive. Year after year, this compounds the problem at a local level where they may have enrollment that's flat, maybe enrollment that's even increasing, yet the dollars that actually get to that school year after year are decreasing.
At the end of the day, what this will result in is fewer dollars go to the wealthier districts. What are you hearing from your colleagues around the suburbs who are saying, well, wait a minute, is this a good idea? Where all of our people are paying taxes.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts in the bill beyond just accounting for poverty, for example, or the interaction between local funds and state funds. What I've heard from many superintendents from districts that may not receive as much money under this bill as they do today is that they value the idea that we have to have a stable formula, one that is easily understood, one that educators across the state have confidence in, and one that meets the needs of the state as a system today, because the formula today doesn't do that. And I think all of those things lead to a better conversation. We've had extensive discussions about some logical mandate relief, for example. We're working on that to be added to Senate Bill 16 too. But all in all, we're trying to take a statewide approach to a statewide problem instead of dicing things up into different buckets like we usually do.
There's been some concern, though, from the Republican side of the aisle, particularly in the Senate, about how this might impact the number, the dollars that go to Chicago public schools out of this whole formula.
Well, we've really tried to be very careful to make sure we don't characterize this debate as one of Chicago versus everyone else or Chicago versus downstate. Downstate schools are a unique body of unique districts downstate. We care about things that do not affect our collar communities and Chicago schools maybe as directly. Things like transportation funding, which every year down here is an issue to our downstate school districts. So what I think, into the committees, one of the positives that came from the committee is you see this, it's a bipartisan effort, and we all agreed at the outset that we're not going to try and take a single approach that looks at the winners and losers of all of this, and that really looks at implementing a system that's fair. There's going to be winners and losers, but if we have a fair system, I think everyone gets behind that. And look, it's not going to change overnight, but as we implement a change, it allows those who maybe are going to see a negative change to adapt to that and to prepare for that and plan for that. And obviously those districts who will reap the reward of these changes, I think they're eager for that opportunity to happen sooner than later.
Clock is ticking. We're recording this on May 1st. The scheduled adjournment is on May 31st. Can you get the job done between now and then?
I think that's to be determined, being realistic. It's been 17 years, so to think that we can make this happen in 30 days now will be a great challenge. We've said all along, I think both the Republicans and the Democrats on the EFAC committee, that this is either going to sink or swim on its own merit. But I think we have a good product, and we have a good amount to go, though.
Looks like you've both done a lot of heavy lifting on it. Thanks very much for your time. We appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Jack.
Senator Andy Manar, Senator Jak Barickman, appreciate your time on Illinois Lawmakers. That's it for this week's edition of Illinois Lawmakers. We will be back next week right here on your local public television station with the May session of the Illinois General Assembly. From all of us at Illinois Lawmakers, good day from Springfield.